Well, joining me now for more on the Bondi Beach attack is the former Australian Prime Minister, Tony Abbott. Mr. Abbott, thank you very much indeed for joining me on Uncensored.
Thanks for having me, Piers.
This has been, as you observed, the worst atrocity against Jews anywhere in the world since October the 7th, and it's happened in your country. How do you feel about that?
Well, I think I feel numbed and I feel slightly ashamed, and I am embarrassed that there hasn't been sufficient leadership in our country to crack down on the manifest examples of Jew hate that we've had over and over again for the last couple of years since the October the 7th atrocity. We haven't had hate preachers deported. We haven't had hate marches banned. Instead, we've had all levels of government engaging in displays of hand-wringing impotence in the face of multiple displays of extreme Jew hatred, and I just think that it's got to stop.
What is the best way to tackle radical Islamist extremism? We've seen a lot of it since the turn of the century, a lot of it fueled perhaps by the war on terror and all the repercussions from that. But this has been going on now for nearly 30 years, and it's been horrific. And what we saw in Bondi was very similar to the stuff we saw from ISIS over the years. So it's not gone away. You know, you ran Australia for nearly 3 years. What do you believe is the most effective way to tackle this?
Well, I think we've got to be absolutely blunt that people who live in countries like Australia, Britain, America, free, democratic, pluralist countries, have got to accept that people have a right to live their own lives, that freedom of speech, freedom of expression, freedom of conscience, freedom of religion are a reality. And people who stand up and insist that Jews should be killed, or that Israel has no right to exist, and that the IDF should be killed, and that there should be a globalised intifada, these people are gravely at odds with our liberal democratic values. And sure, it's all very well to say free speech, but sometimes free speech verges on intimidation. And that's what we've seen. We've seen attempts to intimidate Jewish people, I think attempts to intimidate society at large by militant Islamists in our midst, and it's time for all of this to stop.
There was, of course, an extraordinary irony that the hero who risked his life to save potentially many, many people by taking down one of these terrorists and disarming him was himself a Muslim, was an immigrant from Syria in, I think, 2006 to Australia, clearly not just contributing to society as a fruit seller, but also now as a national hero. So for those who say we can't let Muslims in anymore, you've got right there a shining example of the very best of a Muslim.
I completely agree with you, Piers, and the last thing we should be doing is discriminating on the basis of religion itself. But I think we should be discriminating on the basis of values. And obviously there are some Muslims who are more than happy to join Team Australia and who are more than happy to commit themselves wholeheartedly to our country. There are others who seem to be more interested in a very strict, exclusionary, exclusive version of Islam, and that's where the problem lies. So what I'd like to hope is that over time in countries like Australia and Britain, which are free countries, a different and more genial version of Islam might develop, which is perfectly consistent with living in liberal, plural democracies. But at the moment, there seems to be this struggle inside the soul of Islam between those who believe in live and let live and those who believe in death to the infidels. And obviously, there can be no such thing as death to the infidels in a society such as ours, which are full of infidels.
There is no justification, of course, for this appalling terror attack and no defence for it. Separate to this, though, there is a belief that the Israeli government's actions and the way they've prosecuted the war on Gaza, by destroying so much of it, by killing so many people, including over 20,000 children, that this has made life for Jews around the world less safe. Do you think that is a possibility?
Well, Piers, I can understand the dismay that some people obviously have looking at the devastation in Gaza. But let's not forget who's responsible for this. It's Hamas. I mean, it was Hamas that unleashed terror against Israel on October the 7th. It's Hamas that used their own people as human shields, hid their weapons stores and their terror cells in hospitals and schools and so on. And a country has a right to self-defence. I think that the Israeli armed forces, notwithstanding some terrible mistakes, have been fastidious to try to minimise civilian casualties in a way that, let's face it, Bomber Command didn't always back in the Second World War. So I guess I make 2 points. First, I think we have to be understanding of the predicament that Israel, the Middle East's only liberal democracy, finds itself in. And second, you can disagree, if you like, with the Israeli government's tactics, but that hardly justifies wanting to see the whole state of Israel and some 9 million Jewish people effectively subjected to a new Holocaust. And that's implicit in this whole Palestine must be free from the river to the sea hate-filled rhetoric that we've seen in abundance in the big cities of the West for the last 2 years.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with that. But I also have been very disturbed by the rhetoric coming from the likes of Smodrich and Ben-Gvir in the Israeli government, who have been talking in language that can really only be described as ethnic cleansing, a desire to get rid of all the Palestinians from Gaza and so on. I don't like that either.
But that is not the policy of the Israeli government, although it may indeed be the view of a small handful of people in the Knesset. So, again, but by all means, Piers, let's disagree, let's argue, let's practice free speech. But free speech that involves calls for the destruction of a whole country, free speech that involves calls for death to Jewish people on a mass scale, that's really not free speech. That's incitement to violence. That's kind of rhetorical intimidation. And I just think that there's been far too much of it, which has been officially tolerated by government for far too long.
One of the other issues that's been raised as a result of the mass shooting is guns and gun control. You know, I remember in 1996, I was editor of the Daily Mirror in the UK when Dunblane happened and 16 young children were killed. And there was a dramatic change in gun laws driven by Conservative John Major and then Labour Tony Blair. Blair finished off what Major started and had a profoundly effective impact on gun violence in the UK. And almost at the same time, you had the massacre in Hobart in Tasmania with 35 people killed. And again, very draconian new gun laws brought in, which over time have proven to be very effective, I think, in stemming gun violence to the extent I was telling an American panel earlier that you had in 2023 in Australia, in a country of 27 million people, 31 gun murders from June 23 to June 24. And in 2023 in America, by contrast, with 12 times as many people, you had 18,000 gun murders, which is a gun rate of 580 times as big. So Australia's done very well in curbing gun violence. This has prompted a lot of calls for new gun laws. And I guess, look, I was involved at the sharp end of debating this for years in America and didn't get very far with them, if I'm honest. But as I look at the Prime Minister of Australia now, Anthony Albanese, considering what to do, it is odd to me that this guy whose son had already been flagged up as potentially problematic, potentially getting radicalised in some way, it seems, that his father who you lived with had 6 guns in a country where that's not easy to do. You know, for that alone, do you think it is worth looking at the gun laws again?
Well, Piers, sure, I am amazed and surprised that this individual was able to have 6 military-grade long arms in his possession legally. But I do think that it's a bit of a smokescreen from the Prime Minister. I think there's been an error somewhere for this guy to have had so many guns. But in the end, it's the mindset behind the trigger, so to speak, that's the problem, not the trigger itself. I mean, it's this rampant Jew hatred. It's this sense that somehow it's okay if you're a Muslim to say, oh, Jews should be killed. That's what needs to change. And that's why I would love to see in countries like ours some more genial Muslim leaders emerge who can say, as indeed President al-Sisi did some years ago, when he said, look, for too long, we Muslims have done things in the name of Islam which are wrong, and we have to develop a better mindset if the world is to go forward in peace. And I just think that we need much more of that. We need, if you like, a renaissance, a reformation, some kind of an enlightenment inside Islam, and the sooner it comes, the better for all of us.
Tony Abbott, I really appreciate you coming on Uncensored. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Piers.
Piers Morgan Uncensored is proudly independent. The only boss around here is me. If you enjoy our show, we ask for only one simple thing. Hit subscribe on YouTube and follow Piers Morgan Uncensored on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. And in return, we will continue our mission to inform, irritate and entertain. And we'll do it all for free. Independent, uncensored media has never been more critical, and we couldn't do it without you.